Hey, and welcome back. In this last video for the TI-84 calculator, I'm going to go over the last three sets of skills. So plotting, summary statistics, and some miscellaneous things that you might need. Now, these skills I don't think are quite as important for the statistics exam, although you would use them in your course and for homework. I have denoted that the ones that I think are important have a 1 and a little superscript. So everything on this side has a 1 except the linear regression T procedures, because you'll use these potentially on the AP Stats exam. These ones here have a 2. It's not likely anymore that they have you plot histograms or plot box plots anymore. They usually give you a lot of the plots or running some of the summary statistics. But I think it's good to go through them. So we've gone through these first 2 pages. We're on this final page. In this final page, we need to have this data in. In the last video, I showed you how to put it in. I have that data in already. So under Stat Edit, I've put in this data. This data, data set A, is the following problems. Use the data set to the right, in which A represents the number of hours a person. I didn't finish that. A person is on a treadmill. In data set B, how many miles they traveled. We're going to make a histogram of data set A, make a box plot of data set A, make a normal probability plot of data set A, and then finally make a scatter plot of A versus B. Okay. I am going to clear this out from our last time. I don't want that graph in there. And that's something you want to check before you go to do plots. If you're using a calculator for another class or from previous work, make sure you have nothing in your y equals because it will show up. All right, so to make plots, above the y equals button, at the top there, kind of right underneath the screen, there's a stat plot. So if you hit the second y equals button, these are your plots. You can hit enter to go in and hit enter to turn it on. Whatever is kind of darkened, that's what's on. So this is on. In this case, we want a histogram. So if we go down to type, and then I'm going to scroll to the right to the histogram. That's the histogram. I'm going to go down. The data is actually in L1. Okay. If the data was in L2, I could hit the second button and then the 2 on my calculator's keypad. But I want L1, so I'm going to hit the second button and then the 1. And then the frequency stays at 1. And then this is important. You are going to want to zoom stat. Now, when you hit zoom, it tends to do this. So what you may need to do is quit out, then hit zoom. And zoom stat is zoom 9. So I usually just do zoom 9, but I'll show you. It's right here, zoom stat. And hit enter. And you can see it puts a histogram on the screen. And if you trace it, it'll show you the min and max. So the first bin goes from 2 to up to 7.75. There are 4 data points in there. And the next one has 2 data points, 2, 1, and 1. Okay. And it gives you the ranges at the bottom, or the class values. Okay. Now, if we want to change this to a box plot, we go back to stat plot. Okay. We can go into the first one. We go down, and don't arrow down, although it seems like you want to. Just arrow to the right. I would always choose the first one. That's the modified box plot. That will show outliers if they exist. The rest of it stays the same. So again, we want to zoom, but when you and then so we zoom 9, and then there's the box plot. Okay, so you just change the type to box plot, and then you zoom 9. It gives you a box plot. And if you trace, it gives you the min, Q1, median, Q3, and the max. And there aren't any outliers. If there are any outliers, you'd see them as a dot separated from the end of the whiskers. Okay. Now a normal probability plot. So back to stat plot, go in, go down, and the normal probability plot is actually the last one. Okay. So we go to the 6th one. Again, you have to arrow to the right to get there. And then that's it. Put in, we already have it in for list 1. And then we zoom 9. And there it is. And in this case, this data is good enough to say it's approximately normal for doing testing purposes. It's somewhat linear, this normal probability plot. If you want to, you can trace through the points, although it's not terribly helpful for most people. They're the X values were plotted against their potential Z scores. So there are the first 3 plots. Those are all univariate plots. And now finally our bivariate quantitative plot. So go back to plot, go in here, and we choose the first one. That's actually the scatter plot. And you can see now it says X list and Y list. So we're going to plot the L1 values versus the L2 values. So the list A, B in our case. And again, we finally zoom, and again, it went to that, so I have to quit out of here. So second mode, zoom 9. And you can see it gives us a scatter plot, and you can trace these points and see the different points and how they're plotted again. So each of those are how many hours someone was on a treadmill, how many miles they went in distance. That's what it's plotting. So there's all the plots. Okay. The next thing to look at is summary statistics. Okay. So to do summary statistics, we are going to go to Stat and over to Calculate. So the second menu. We've used Stat Edit, Stat Test, Stat Calc. One variable stats. That's what we're going to be using. One variable stats. Hit Enter. And I'm just going to get the one variable stats in L1. So the summary statistic is about how many hours people spent in the treadmill. Frequency list will stay empty. And calculate. So it tells us the average hours was 12. That was the average hours people spent on the treadmill. The standard deviation was 7.659. We'll use S of X almost all the time. And it gives you the 5-number summary down here. Okay. That's how you do one variable stats for a data set. Now, it's also possible to give you one variable stats for a probability distribution. Now, that's a little trickier. And actually, I'm going to go in and show this. And I don't have my worksheet right now. So I go to Stat, Edit. I'm going to put these in L3 and L4. So let's say you were asking people how many siblings they have, and the responses you got were 0, 1, 2, or 3. Oops, 2 or 3. And then what you put here is the probability. And you'd say, well, let's say that 20% of the people had no siblings, 50% of them had one sibling, 20% of them had, well, let's say 25% of them had 2 siblings, which meant 5% here. And those should add up to 1. So, 70, 95, 100. So what we have in L3 are the values the variable can take on, 0, 1, 2, or 3. And in L4, we have the probability or frequency with which those values take on, the frequency with which those variables take on value. So then it's the same menu. We go to Stat, Calculate, one variable stats, but now I'm going to take L3, those are the values, and then for frequency list, I'm going to put in L4, okay, L4, and then you're going to hit Calculate. So this gives you that the average number of siblings was 1.15 with a standard deviation of 0.79. Okay. And those are the two things that you might want in doing this. That calculate the mean and standard deviation of a probability distribution. Those are the two things that we got here. Okay. So again, in this case, you need to have a list. I'm going to go back to Stat, Edit. So a list of values the variable can take on, which I put in L3. And then the likelihood of them taking on those values, or the frequency, we could have put frequency. I could have put numbers 20, 50, 25, and 5. That would have worked out too. That those variables take on those values. Okay. And then finally, the last summary statistic really is doing the summary of a linear regression. So if we go to Stat and over to Calculate, you can see that down here we have linear regression. I actually prefer 8, where you have the y-intercept first. So I'm going to choose linreg, this one, hit Enter. And then we're putting in L1 versus L2. So we're plotting those A versus B values, so the time on the treadmill and how far they went. Okay, there is no frequency list here. And then again, if we want to, we can store it into, oops, that's not what I want. We can store it into Y1. So if you hit alpha F4, you store it into Y1. And this might be helpful, I'll show you why. And then you hit Calculate. Now, it gives us this information. It gives us the slope, or the y-intercept and the slope. It doesn't give us R and R squared. And your calculator might not either. And that's because when the calculator resets itself, it turns off the diagnostics. The easiest way, probably the easiest way to turn this back on, is to go to your catalog. Okay? And so to get here, right above the 0 at the bottom of the screen, it says catalog. So I'm going to hit the second button and then 0. And then I'm just going to scroll down for a while. And it's going to be pretty slow because I can't hold this down right here. But I can also hit alpha D, and then I'll get me there a little faster. Hopefully, alpha D. There we go. And then I'm going to go down until I see something that says diagnostics on. Oops. And we're going to go down. There we go. Diagnostics on. I'm going to hit enter there. Enter again. Now it says done. So now the diagnostics have been turned on. So then if I go back and do it again, stat, calculate linear regression, and you go here, and again, if I hit alpha F4, I can put it in Y1, you hit enter. Now you can see it gives you R squared and R. All right. So this is a very strong positive relationship, and 97.9% of the variation in Y is accounted for by the regression model with X. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, I stored that into Y1. So then if you have your scatter plot turned on, okay, which we did, and you had it zoomed already, which we did, and then you go to graph, it puts the regression line right through your points. Okay, so there was the scatter plot, there's the regression line for those particular points. Okay, so now we've done all the summary statistics and all the plots, and finally, this is pretty quick stuff. Just some counting things with factorial combinations and permutations. Okay. We have a group of 15 students. Okay. How many ways can 3 students be selected for the positions of vice president, and secretary? So based on how this is set up, this is a permutations question because it's 15 people and we need 3 of them, but order matters. So if you go to math and to probability, so you hit the math button, which is below the alpha key, and arrow to the probability tab, you can see NPR. Now, when you do this in an 84, you have to put in the number first, the number. So I have to put in 15, math, go here, and then I'm going to hit NPR, and then I'm going to say 3. So 2,730 ways those 15 students could be selected into those positions. Now, what if there wasn't positions? What if it's just 3 people for the student council? Then it doesn't matter what order you get them in, because person ABC and person BCA are still the same 3 people for the student council. So again, you have to put in the 15 first, but this becomes a combination question. So you choose NCR, then you put in 3. Only 455 students. And then finally, use technology to randomly select 3 students. So what I can do is, again, under math, probability, we have rand int. I'm going to rand integer. I'm going to put in 15 people. I'm going to say that I want 3 of them. I'm going to hit enter. Oops. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Let me do this correct. So go to math, go to probability. Don't use this one quite as often. We'd say 1 to 15, and I want 3 numbers. 3 numbers between 1 and 15. So there are 3 numbers between 1 and 15. So I got to put a lower bound and upper bound and the number of students, or the number of, well, in this case students, but the number of numbers I want. Now in this case, you will get repeats, so you got to be aware of that, but it is something you can use to do randomization. All right, so that ends the tutorials for the TI-84. Hopefully that is helpful. There also are tutorials available for the TI Inspire, as well as the class calc graphing calculator. Thank you.